Welcome to Making Chassidus Real, Part 6. Today, I just want to briefly highlight a few ideas which are connected to some of the things we covered in the last few weeks, and also connected to the process of Elul and Tishrei. Just want to point out that after today, I'm going to take a break till after Yontif, and then Emir Hashem resume once the Yom Tovim are over. So one of the Nakudus that we have spoken about over the last few weeks is the concept of lofty madregas that Chassidus talks about that sometimes seem too overwhelming and things that are out of our reach, and being honest with ourselves, things that we won't necessarily be able to actually reach or even partially reach maybe. But we talked about the idea that first of all what we need to do is we need to gain clarity. In other words, understand the concept without diluting it at all, understand it in its purity, and then let it drive and inspire little changes that we make. So we make changes and we grow and we live our life impacted by these big madregas like bittul or avas Hashem and so on and so forth. So we learn what they are, and the more we learn what they are, the more we learn about their greatness, we try to apply a little bit to have an effect on the way we live our life in our own avodas Hashem. So this idea is actually expressed very, very beautifully in the process of Teshuva and Cheshbon HaNefesh. We know that it's the month of Elul. Elul is Chodesh HaCheshbon. The Rabbi used to mention this very, very often. The Cheshbon HaNefesh, which then intensifies once Chai Elul comes, because then the Cheshbon is for each month, and a Cheshbon Tzedek, and so on and so forth. So it's known that there's a concept that Chassidim always talked about, that there's 3 stages in a cheshbon. How do you make a cheshbon? A real cheshbon HaNefesh. We talk about cheshbon HaNefesh. It's supposed to be a real thing. We don't just call the month Chodesh Cheshbon, Chodesh HaCheshbon, but it's supposed to be a real thing. That we make a Chodesh, we make a cheshbon HaNefesh. So the way it goes is that there's 3 ideas. We need to first make a cheshbon vima is, which means how we are. Then we need to make a cheshbon v'medaf sign, how we should be. And thirdly, the cheshbon of v'meken sign, how can we be? Let's explain. So a person has to make first of all cheshbon where we are. That's sometimes confronting, not so simple. As it says in many of the Mamorim, that sometimes we make a cheshbon tzedek, we get a bit uncomfortable, which is not a terrible thing. We understand that we've created a bit of a distance between us and Hashem, and so on and so forth, and it motivates us and inspires us in the process of mitzvah Teshuva. So that's how we are, to be honest with ourselves, how we are, nasei toiv and surmira, the good, the not so good, and so on and so forth. But then there's the medaf side. The second part is we need to do a cheshbon and learn and educate ourselves how we're supposed to be. Remind ourselves of the concepts of Chassidus, how we're supposed to be in the ideal is totally bottled, reaching madregas of avas Hashem, yiras Hashem, avodas hatfilah, and so on and so forth. The list goes on. That's how we're supposed to be. Learn about what it says in Tanya, about what a Benyan is all about, in control of a machshava dibur maisa. Learn it well, understand it properly, like we've been talking about over the last few weeks. That's very important. But then there's a third part to the cheshbon, and the third part of the cheshbon is v'mekenzai. We need to do a cheshbon of, so what could we actually achieve? What could we improve on? Because it's unrealistic to think that we could achieve all the things v'medaf sign, that we can achieve all the things how we're supposed to be, because let's be honest, we're not going to get there. We're not going to have the avas Hashem on the level that it speaks about in Tanya. We're not going to become oivdei Hashem with tefillah like the huge chassidim. We're not necessarily going to be in control of our machshava dibur maisa all the time. We can try, but we know our limitations. We know where we are. So therefore, the third part of the cheshbon has to be mikenzai. So what can I do? So the question is, if how I'm supposed to be is not something I could really reach, so why is that part of the cheshbon? In other words, obviously I need to think about where I am. Obviously I need to think about what I could achieve. But what's the point in really thinking about what I'm supposed to achieve, what I should be achieving in the ideal world, if I'm not going to get there anyways? And the answer is the very point we've been making. We make a cheshbon of how we are. And then we make a cheshbon, the final cheshbon we make is what we could achieve. But if we first make a cheshbon of what we're supposed to achieve, then what we could achieve is completely different. In other words, the more we study and understand the ultimate chassid, the ultimate Oved Hashem, the ultimate madregas, the more we understand the real hashkafa of Chassidus, of how things are supposed to be, the more we'll push ourselves in the process of how we could be. That goalpost will shift just a little bit. We will push ourselves a little bit more. Still very far from the ultimate madrega, but the ultimate madrega and the ultimate hashkafa makes a bigger dent. That's why that second part is so important. That's why understanding in an undiluted way what the real madrega and those lofty ideas look like in Chassidus is so important. The more we understand how the world is completely nothing, how bittul means complete bittul, how avas Hashem and yiras Hashem and all these things, the more push we give ourselves when it comes to the cheshbon of what could I do. That's the process, and that reflects very nicely, of course, when it comes to Teshuva and the whole process of Elul, of how the concepts we spoke about over the last few weeks reflect themselves in this journey as well. Just one more small nakuda, of course. We talked about bittul, and we talked about how bittul brings tshuva. And then we come to the Chodesh Elul, and we find many often, we look in the Friedrich Zamorim, we look in the Rebbe Zamorim, we talk about cheshbon and tshuva. And on the one hand, we know that we have a nefesh habamis, and when we do a proper cheshbon, it could lead to a feeling of discomfort. At the same time, we get told that tshuva has to be besimcha, of course. The Rebbe emphasizes this in the most amazing way. And I think one of the things to think about always, but particularly in this process of preparing for a new year and the whole idea of tshuva, the way it's spoken about in Chassidus, if we take it seriously at some level, is that these two things, of course, are not a stira, not a contradiction at all. We know that Alter Rebbe speaks in the Prokim, Chavav, Chavzayin, Chavtes, and so on, in those Prokim, about how we need to put down the Nefesh Habamis, because the Nefesh Habamis is a clipper, the way it's applied, and it's preventing us from being connected to Hashem, and therefore we think about its bittul, and we think about its flaws, and we think about what we could do to control it, and so on and so forth, which of course sometimes is not such an easy thing to do. But at the same time, we have the tremendous simcha because the nefesh elokis, the fact that the Eibishter welcomes us back, the fact that the Eibishter allows us to connect to Him, the Eibishter allows us to control the nefesh habamis. We know the idea of chedva, that we can have happiness and the merirus at the same time, all those things it talks about Tanya. In other words, one of the things we always need to remember as Chassidim, and when we learn Chassidus, that there can be a lot of things happening at the same time, and that's really part of Chassidus, and it's very mudgish, it's very emphasized when it comes this time of the year. The cheshbon HaNefesh is a serious thing. Taking ha'achlata, upgrading ourselves for the coming year is a serious thing. And sometimes it's hard work, and sometimes even a little bit uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to confront our own weaknesses and to recognize that there's areas that we need to improve, and so on and so forth. At the same time, it's not a stira, it's not a contradiction to come in with tremendous simcha of the fact that we, number one, as the Rebbe would always say, that we are completely confident, loishim levanim and misatfim levanim, and we bateach b'Hashem, that He accepts our tshuva, and He blesses us with aksivach simatova, and so on and so forth. And also the very fact, as it says in Tanya, that the Eibishter b'tzad nefesh elokis, we are maminim b'nei maminim, and the Eibishter is connected to us, and He welcomes us back, and His chanun amar b'lisloach, and so on and so forth, as all these things are spoken about. So I just wanted to share that as it's Chodesh Elul, connected to the things we've talked about before, like bittul. Bittul is not a negative thing, on the contrary, bittul means when you take away the zich, the ich, and you become part of a much greater reality. Similar concept with regard to tshuva. It's sometimes a confronting process, but it's about the tremendous simcha of being able to upgrade and connect to the Eibishter in a much greater way. So all these things are so reflected in this time of the year. So I want to just take this opportunity. As I said, I'm going to take a break now till after Yontif, wishing everyone a ksiva v'chsiva tova and a good bench to the yor, b'tov hanira v'hanigla. Kol tov and a good yor.